Legendary creatures have long been the face of the game from a marketing standpoint, but with EDH currently being the most heavily played format, their gameplay and mechanics are now more relevant than ever. So, with changing attitudes towards card design and narrative integration, which of the game's characters do we think deserve a revamp in their next printing? Welcome to Magic the Flavouring, the Magic the Gathering podcast, where we talk about all things Magic flavour design and lore. I'm your host, Andy Mann.
Hello, this is Nathan Cancel.
And Happy New Year to all the Magic people. We're recording this on the 7th, so it's already a week into the new year, and you're going to be hearing this probably a few days later, so, no point in me saying that, but Happy New Year!
Happy New Year! It's a new year, more exciting, yeah, we got to 2021, yeah.
2022, blimey. And Magic is looking pretty exciting in 2022, but we're not talking about what's going on right now, because we have this brief little moment in time where we as content creators don't have to talk about the new release or the new product, because I've given up talking about Secret Layers, don't know about you, and Double Feature doesn't really count, and Kamigawa is still like a few weeks away, so we're just going to talk about like whatever we want. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's funny because then you go, what do you want to talk about? It's like, wait, I have autonomy, I have a choice in what I want to talk about. I haven't thought about that before, or at least it feels like in months. So yeah, it's quite privileged.
Pretty cool. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, today we're going to be talking a little bit about card design, and basically we're going to be talking about the creatures in Magic, or the planeswalkers, the legends in Magic that we feel either haven't had their peak card designed for them yet, or we feel like card designs for them in the past, from a flavor point of view, were maybe a bit lacking. So this is a bit of this is sort of a very niche-y topic, but I think it's one that people do have a lot, especially if you are into the flavor of the game and you're into mechanics reflecting the narrative of who the creature or who the planeswalker is as a character. And obviously that's what we do on this podcast. So we're not game designers, we're not card designers, and a lot of the decisions that were made for a lot of the cards that we're going to talk about today were obviously informed by the limited meta, the constructed meta, all different kind of balancing issues within sets. We're going to ignore all of that good stuff and literally just whinge and bitch and moan about the fact that our characters didn't do what we think the characters should have done, like good Magic players. And I think everyone has these creatures and these planeswalkers that they have in their collections where they just feel like they just haven't sat right with them on the cardboard. Do you think that's fair, or do you think most people don't care about that kind of thing?
I think it's more noticeable when you have a character that you really liked, and then you see it get a new version, and then the new version's really disappointing, right? Or if you're waiting for a card for a long time, you see in a lot of flavor text, say for example Ludovic, right? And then you're waiting for ages, and then you finally get him, and it's a disappointing, semi-okay partner card. And I think that partner word actually hides way more sins than people realize, not just from a mechanical point of view, in terms of hurting the flavor of a card and the power of a card. And then obviously years down the line, when they finally go, oh, okay, we know that everyone really needed a Ludovic they can play, so then they make the new one in the latest set that kind of it fixes that kind of thing, and that's very helpful when you go back to new planes. But if you are looking like planes say Wrath, or I don't know, Mercadia or somewhere like that, and it was you really liked from that set, especially older sets, one, we're much less likely to go back to the plane, so you're less likely to see it in a standard set. You're going to have to see it in Modern Horizons or Commander Legends or something like that. But also you're less likely to, in general, it's just you're just less likely to have the opportunity for them to fix it. So it's one of these things like hunting for a Gix card, and at this point I think it's just a troll, right? If we don't get it in Commander Legends 2, then I don't know what the hell's going on in life. But yeah, it's one of those things. If you have this character that you really, really enjoyed, especially from the old stories where you got a little bit more of them, and then you don't see that card, like Colfner, for example, wasn't printed in a card, and yet was a big part of the story for Lorwyn. It took a long time for someone to get a card for it. There's a massive amount of catharsis when you finally print it, but for those people that are harkening for it to begin with, I think it's damaging when you can't play with the game pieces from the story of the game, and they're so closely tied together, right?
Yeah, so yeah, you mentioned Ludovic like quite early on there, and like Ludovic is the kind of poster child for this idea that a card, even people with passing ideas of what the story is, kind of already recognise that card wasn't great. So you got Ludovic Necro Alchemist, which was in the commander sets with the partners. He was blue red, which didn't really fit with the sort of necromancer angle of the plane of Innistrad, but he was just there to kind of fill like the kind of color spectrum that they were doing with the partners. His ability was at the beginning of each player's end step, that player may draw a card. If a player other than you lost life this turn, drawing cards, losing life just didn't really feel like the kind of thing that we came to expect from the mad geniuses of Innistrad, especially when you compare Ludovic to like Gisa and Gerolf, who Gerolf is very closely tied to Ludovic in the story. And then we did get in the latest Innistrad set, or rather, I suppose, Innistrad block in Midnight Hunt, you got Ludovic Necro Genius, which was whenever Ludovic Necro Genius enters the battlefield or attacks, mill a card. So filling up your graveyard was far more synergistic. Then his second ability was X blue blue black black. Exile X creature cards from your graveyard and transform Ludovic. X can't be zero, activate this only as a sorcery. And then you flipped one to the backside for Olag, Ludovic's Hubris. And like, regardless of what the card does, like the flavor of the card is that Ludovic had turned himself into an amalgamation and like stitched all these different creatures that you'd exiled from your graveyard together to make this monstrosity. So that is a really clear and good example of a creature that didn't fit the narrative and the flavor remit the first time around to the point where it was jarring, even for people to play it just as a game piece. And then they sort of retconned it, but not retcon. They just, the next time we saw Ludovic, they kind of made the card what we expected. I think an argument can be made for another card that came out recently in Crimson Vow, where you had the latest Odric card, right?
Oh
Where
God, yeah.
Everyone had a go. So Odric's had 3 cards, right? So you've had Odric Master Tactician, Odric Lunarch Marshal, and then the latest one, Blood Cursed. And both Lunarch Marshal and Master Tactician was all about when things attacked, things happened. So Master Tactician was you got to choose the blocks and the attacks if you attacked with the Silent Mat creatures. Lunarch Marshal was keyword focused. And then Blood Cursed was when Odric Blood Cursed enters the battlefield, create X Blood tokens with X number of abilities from flying, first strike, double strike, death touch, HF proof, indestructible, lifelink, menace, reach, trample, vigilance, found among creatures you control. So they did still keep Odric within the keyword abilities, but because Odric this time round was a vampire and they added red into his colour pie as well, because he was mono white, people gave out because to a lot of people it didn't seem like Odric was the thing they wanted for. But in relation to the story, actually the use of blood tokens, like to kind of synergize him with the vampires, adding red into his color pie because he's now kind of got the passion of like vampiric blood flowing through him, all this kind of stuff. I sort of feel like maybe it was okay. Like for this discussion, for example, one of the big cards that when I kind of said to you, oh, let's do an episode like this, I had Azor the Lawbringer in my head as a card that I was going to talk about. And Azor the Lawbringer was a character from Ixalan's story, but he used to be a planeswalker, and he was the progenitor of basically a lot of law systems across the multiverse. He was the progenitor of the Azorius Senate, for example, on Ravnica. And his ability is when he comes in, opponents can't cast spells, instants or sorceries on their turn, and he has a Sphinx's Revelation ability. And to me, that didn't seem like what the character was about. But then the more I thought about it, the more I couldn't really think of another thing he could do, and actually locking down the board and implementing a rule, and then having the Sphinx's Revelation because he's also very knowledgeable because he's a Sphinx. I think some cards don't look like the thing on the face of it, and then when you dig into it, you're like, oh, actually, no, game design did do quite a good job there. I mean, I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, I mean, when you mentioned Azor originally, I was like, it was funny because I think as much as he wasn't, because there's a big as you said earlier, like, and put at the beginning of the episode, like we're not talking here in terms of like viability, right, and playability. And the thing about Azor was just a 6-drop semi do nothing, because like okay, he meant that your opponents weren't likely to play any removal for the next round of turns until you got to your turn. You could attack with it, but they can still interact at instant speed on your turn when you attack with him for the Sphinx Revelation. So in terms of play pattern, he wasn't like super crazy powerful, but I mean, in terms of what he did, I think it was literally a spell within the same set that was like Sphinx's Retort or something like that, and it said had the same
Sphinx's
ability, right?
tutelage?
No, that's the mill card.
That's the mill card.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly what it is. It's Decree, Sphinx's Decree or something
Yeah.
like that. And it does the same ability of where it's a 1 and a white, and you cast it, and your opponents can't cast instant sorceries this turn, or something along that line. It's the setting the law, as it were. And if you look at cards like Render Silent and stuff like that, it also kind of follows that Azorius kind of feeling. And I was thinking,
Yeah.
as a card, distinctly in terms of the progenitor of the Azorius, of course he casts Sphinx's Revelation. It's his spell. And not only does he cast it, he does it on every attack. He has a revelation every turn. That kind of idea of like, that kind of shade is resplendent, academic logic kind of thing. So I thought, it was surprising to me that you brought it up, because I was like, yeah, okay, as much as it wasn't like everyone was playing him, he was, I think, still a succinct example of like what he would do. And as you say, I don't know what else I'd want him to do. Wouldn't make him feel generically smart and clever.
I think he, for Azor's thing, and I think this. So for this episode, we've picked 3 main creatures and or planeswalkers each that we're going to talk about, and then it's going to lead to discussions about like what could have been done with them, how could we have seen them evolved. Like Odric, like we already had 2 iterations, and then the third one was kind of a split between a bunch of them with like new spin on it. But I feel with Azor, what I wanted from Azor was some indication, as to his planeswalker past, because he's a big character in the story. I know they kind of they gave him backstory, like kind of when they introduced him, but he was already a character in like the lore, and he was a big part of it. And he's like, he had interactions with Bolas, with Ugin, like Ravnica's like a whole Ravnican guild is based around him. Like he's a big deal, and I just kind of felt like a 6-drop fatty griffin that just comes in and goes, oh yeah, a little bit of control, a Sphinx's Rev, and it was just a bit too cute for me. Like the fact that they stuck a Sphinx's Rev onto him was a bit like, they could have, I don't know, I wanted something more, I think. But as you say, the more you looked into it, the more you think, oh, actually no, that does actually hold up quite well. And there's for 2 of the 3 creatures that I've picked, I can see the flavor that they've done on them, and especially in their like original iterations. But it's further down the line where I think these characters maybe got a little bit let down, or in hindsight of like the larger sets or things that they could have done with them that I think would have evoked who they were a bit better and given better sort of like gameplay around what they're doing. I just think there was opportunities that were missed in favor of like very much a simplified version of what they're about, especially nowadays when legendary creatures are pushed beyond belief. Some of the older ones that we're going to talk about, I think have got short shrift, and I'm surprised they haven't had better versions of them done now. It does sort of lead to the caveat that some of the characters we've spoken about would be able to get newer versions of cards, if that makes sense. Like the character isn't dead in the story, or there's no chance we're ever going to see them again. I don't know if you've done that, but there were definitely a couple of creatures that I looked at and was like, oh, it'd be great to see them again. Oh no. We can't.
It's funny because I've got an example of this. I think this is a good. I think the Teferi core set was a really good example of like they can still very much do a pocket of story and kind of give you characters that aren't around anymore and give them a new breath of life. Whether that works or not, whether they do it justice or not, is another thing. But like for example, like getting Yambi and that kind of thing, getting Sabira. Like we'd never got a Sabira card otherwise, but we still got a Sabira card, and the card's like pretty good in terms of like what I think it should do as a caravaner. I feel like it's a low drop kind of red legendary creature, makes your creatures unblockable, draws your cards maybe, like and again we weren't ever going to see Sabira in terms of like, well, she's dead. So I think especially with looking at like the Brothers War, which is something I'll talk about a little bit later, like there is opportunity to look at parts of time in the past and do a set about it and it not feel weird and too nebulous compared to like the main story arcs. Like I feel like they're doing quite well at going, we can just do a little look at the past, we can go back to Mercadia, we could go back to do a Mirage set, that we could redo that. And I feel like the general player base would be accepting of that, especially now when there's a lot more, I want to play this commander, please. Can you give me a Meraxus that doesn't absolutely suck? Because, I played that game years ago and I really liked him and he was really cool and his card's a bit shit. Like, for example, Jessica's a really good example of this, right? Like, Jessica was, her original card was pretty shit. Kamal, for example, like Kamal and Jessica are a good example because Kamal's card wasn't that much better than his original green cards, but then both his green card and his red card, could be considered lackluster. And whereas Jessica, her creature card, very lackluster, definitely don't want to play it as a commander, and now, you can play her as a planeswalker commander. How much cooler is that, So there is an opportunity to see them.
we're coming at this from the sort of privilege of being primarily EDH players, and but when I say privilege, I mean that WotC is very much catering to us now, and probably will for the foreseeable. So I think us talking about like, well, give us all the toys that we want, is because we expect it.
Yeah, and it's gonna happen.
However, like correct that is for the game at large, like sorry, limited and sort of standard players and constructed players, but yeah, that's how we go. But I think with sets becoming quite legendary heavy compared to how they were beforehand. Obviously the original Kamigawa had the gimmick that all the they had loads of legendary creatures, and that pretty much every rare was a legendary or so, whatever it was. And that Dominaria also had a legendary theme running through it when we went to Dominaria, or came back to it in the Dominarian set. I think nowadays with the introduction of uncommon legendaries or lots more legendary like artifacts or enchantments or whatever else, this, that, and the other, like the idea of having one-ofs in your standard deck, or at least things that you can only put one of on the battlefield at least, is becoming more common in gameplay anyway. So I feel like it's maybe not too much to ask that some of these things get a little more pushed. And if it is, then this is just all conjecture. This is just us for an excuse for us to talk about the lore that we like and us wanting to see on the cards, really. So yeah, as much like we're going to moan and whinge, but I do understand why the cards were designed the way that they were, and I do think that pumping too much flavor into the game would be disastrous for it as a strategy game. Like it would just be chaos all the time. It's why the format of EDH exists, is for that to be able to breathe and like kind of get like expressed. We don't necessarily need it in every other format. So I don't actually expect our changes to be made, and nor would I really want them to. But my storyline brain still would love it, I think.
Yeah, no, agreed. I think it's funny as well that sometimes people can be too precious, right? Of where, like, and this is the Eldrick example of where they just try to do something slightly different, try and keep him within the theme. And I think even Mark's turned around and been like, yeah, we admit now, looking back, it was a disappointment. It's like the only reason you can look back and see it's disappointment is because your audience didn't enjoy it, right? And I think it's very subjective, especially when you get to in terms of like, when you're looking at, is this card viable? Is this card what I feel like Eldrick should be doing? Well, that's a big difference, because being competitively viable is something that's easily to like define as a metric, whereas is this what I think the card should do is super different person to person, right? So it's a lot harder when you don't do like, if you do something really, really, really specific, it's going to alienate some people, but it's going to give the card a lot of individual flavor and hit the note much better for some people. Whereas if you do like generic flavor, then the average person is going to be more satisfied, but the people that really like the character are like, yeah, well, this is just what every other red card does, so it's kind of really hard to find that sweet spot where it's a very unique effect but also feels like it fits the theme of the card and the character.
For sure. All right, well, that's almost 20 minutes of us trying to explain the premise of this episode, so that's probably a good sign, right? Let's just jump in. So I've got three legendary creatures. I know you've got. Did you say you got some planeswalkers in your one?
I don't actually, weird enough. No,
oh.
I found. The thing is, I was originally going to try and find some of the War of the Spark ones that I thought that were lacking, and the only one that I could find that was like, oh, I want more is Wanderer, and we've literally just got key art from Neon Dynasty, which shows that she's going to get a new card. So I'm like,
yeah,
I'll hold out on that for now. Whereas I feel like every other uncommon one that was a bit plain has had an interesting Planeswalker card represented otherwise, and it was kind of, it's difficult when they have to make uncommon Planeswalkers for you not to go, oh, but you didn't push it, did you? They go, well, no, it's an uncommon Planeswalker. Of course we didn't push it. What the fuck do you want from us?
Well, that leads me very nicely onto my first legendary creature. Was part of an uncommon cycle, and I feel they could have pushed them to rare. So there we go. That's my first big controversial point. I'm going to talk about Ruther, Mercurial Artist from Strixhaven. So Ruther was one of the 5 sort of student cards, I guess you could call them. Like they had during the marketing of Strixhaven. As everyone would know, because it was relatively recent, they had the 5 schools of magic represented as by their students, by like their kind of prominent characters, and each one was like featured on a lot of the marketing. There was a lot of the key art. Most of the commands have one of these students like prominent in the artwork, or at least a version of them, because I think the commands were maybe done a little bit earlier, like the characters got changed a little bit. But for me, some of them are stronger and some of them are weaker in terms of what the kind of spin on each of the schools was for their color pairing. So, for example, Quintorius, which was the red-white one for Lorehold, his card was excellent at trying to describe like what this new sort of take on Boris was trying to do, and for an uncommon legendary as well. I actually thought it was quite powerful. So Quintorius, for example, let me just find him. Oh my gosh. Where are you? There we go. Quintorius, Field Historian. It's 3 red-white for a Elephant Cleric, legendary creature, 2/4. Spirits you control get +1/+0, and whenever one or more cards leaves your graveyard, create a 3/2 red and white spirit creature token, which for Lorehold is absolutely perfect. It's got Spirit Synergy, which was kind of the main tribe for Lorehold. It had whenever one or more cards leaves your graveyard, create a 3/2 red and white spirit creature token, which was Quintorius sifting through the ruins of an ancient civilization, or literally digging up graves, as is the case might be, to create a spirit, because the Lorehold school is able to talk to the ancient spirits of, like, old civilizations, and they talk to them through these sort of spirit statues that they communicate to them with their magic. And I thought the whole card in itself, that could have very easily been a rare as well. Like, the fact that that's uncommon is pretty nuts. But it really spoke to something that school was doing in an interesting way that was also relevant to the character of Quintorius, because his whole story in the Strixhaven side stories was that he was going to search an ancient civilization for, like, treasures and clues and historical significance. So that was really well done. You then look at Ruther, Mercurial Artist, and it's 1 blue-red for an Orc Shaman legendary creature, 1/4. Pay 2, return Ruther, Mercurial Artist to its owner's hand, copy target instant sorcery spell, you may choose new targets for the copy. That's something we've seen so many times in Spellslinger. Like, Prismari, I think, funnily enough, I liked Prismari because of its flavour, but in terms of its function, Prismari played out probably the most bland out of all the 5 spins on what things were trying to do, because it was essentially just Spellslinger. But the fact that it also had treasure token synergies, there was lots of ideas that, things could be a bit more spontaneous, like a lot of the bigger spells, you could also pitch for a treasure token instead of using them, or they had multiple, like, sort of different synergies. I just feel like Ruther didn't get the card that Ruther deserved. Like, in A Cry of Magic, which is a story that we did a story spotlight on an MTG book club, we find that Ruther is a character that is plagued by the sort of oppression of, like, expectation. Like, Ruther's mother was a massively talented artist and very sort of refined and delicate in what they were trying to do, and Ruther was trying to copy that. And we actually find throughout the story that if Ruther embraces their inner passion and their inner anger in a lot of ways, they're able to create works of art that are incredibly spontaneous and expressive in a way that is not controlled. And I just kind of feel like paying a bit of mana to return, like, what's the return to hand thing? And just to copy a spell, like, it makes the spell double? I don't know, it just didn't feel like it was on the same page as the other students in the set. I don't know how you feel about that.
I think it's interesting, right? Because out of all the five students, all of them have 2 abilities. And Killian even has 3 if you count keywords as separate ones, and Ruther only got 1.
Yeah, really
And
strange.
I don't know if it was balancing purpose, and this is where obviously we have to kind of consider, like, design wise, why they do what they do. And I think we've talked about this before, about, I feel like it's a really good thing to have your uncommon archetype signifiers being legendary creatures, because it gives them a little bit more gravitas, right? It makes them pop a little bit more, and it's also a way to get more characters into the set, and it's also a way to go, if you didn't want to play the mythic or the rare legendary or whatever from that tribe or from that school or from that clan or whatever they're doing with this within the set, you can choose the uncommon one. You can do, like, either a pauper commander deck, or you can have it where it's a little bit lower power and you can kind of focus the deck around that. And if, like, all 4 of them, Dina, Quintorius, Killian, and I've forgotten
Zimone,
thank you.
Yeah.
They all have viability, like interesting viability, whereas Ruther is literally just, it's a copy. I mean, it's like a dual caster mage, right, on the stack, or in the command zone, and it doesn't even play in the same fashion because it's bouncing back to your hand. So it doesn't necessarily have the same. It feels like it was just missing. Again, it just feels like balancing purposes must have curtailed the interest in the design,
for sure. And even, like, so other cards where Ruther appears on in the set, so cards like Start from Scratch or Sudden Breakthrough, have this, regardless of what they do. Like, I think Start from Scratch is a damage dealer and destroys an artifact, and then Sudden Breakthrough is a pump spell, right, which creates a token, I think, or draws a card. Either way, like, they feel very, like, immediate. They feel very expressive. They're punching through. Whereas Ruther is just, it's just an effect we've seen time and time again. It's just copying a target. It's just sort of very powerful, but something we've seen before. And I think my design for this card, if I was to redesign it or give Ruther a second crack at the whip, if ever we go back to Strixhaven, is informed a lot more maybe by the Prismari Precon Commander decks, where they did get to expand on their ideas for each of the schools a lot more freely because they're not being tied down to standard metas. A lot of the spells in that precon are a lot more like sort of not random's not the word, but they have a lot more different modes that can kind of create spontaneous gameplay. Like the face commander for that box was Zephi, where you kind of level up what he does the bigger the spell is. So the bigger the spell is, the bigger the effect is. And the kind of a lot of the play styles and the play patterns kind of reward you for almost like, I don't know, like jazzing through the commander deck. Like I play as a Vi deck, and every time I play it, I never know quite what's going to happen because it plays a lot with Storm and playing things off the top of your library. And like in the main set, you had Nefari, like what the Dean, the Dean card. So you had yeah. Oh my god, I can never remember the names of them, even though I talk about them all the time. But the red side of the Dean card is essentially a stolen strategy. So you never know what's going to happen. Like you could play things off the top of the people's decks. You might not get anything. You might whiff. You might hit something big. It felt very immediate. And then you also had expressive iteration is also in the main set, where you put something like in exile, you put something to the bottom of the library, you put something into your hand, and you never know what's quite going to happen. And I feel like they were trying to do that in the main set. And I just feel like Ruther was so Route 1, whereas what I would actually want to see from Ruther, if there was to kind of help her character, would be something maybe a little bit dangerously close to Narset Enlightened Master, where if you attack with Ruther, or if you pay into Ruther, so you can still keep the pay thing, you're flipping things off the top of your library until you hit an instant or sorcery card, and then you get to play that instant and sorcery card, whether you pay mana for it or you play it for free. I just kind of wanted that more random element, or the idea that if you try and swing for the fence and you try, express yourself or use your passion in terms of your mana, you get to do something big. Whereas Ruther, just you pay a bit of mana, you copy target instant sorcery spell. It follows that line a little bit, but it's in itself, it's boring, which is exactly what they were trying not to do with the Prismari. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I feel like also from a character point of view, it's that the play pattern is her stepping back, whereas I feel like as an orc shaman, you would be stepping forward.
Yeah.
Even something as simple as that, of where it feels like that idea of it's always like maybe it plays within the story of her being quite, fearful of her own expression, that she's like, runs away from her. It's that kind of thing of where you're trying to fight for the flavor for the character. It kind of doesn't work so much, right? And
Maybe
I guess
she's
also
trying to copy her mother's work like she does in the story, but that's quite a negative ability to have.
Sure, yeah, and I guess it's also because we got more of her. It seems to be like we got more of her story anyway. It's kind of funny that it didn't seem that any of those character traits that we saw in the story kind of transferred over. Again, like this is the issue when you do uncommon uncommon legends, right, or use your characters, is that they're naturally going to have a little limitation to them. Like Killian happens to just be a really really cool Voltron commander that Orzhov doesn't normally get. Other than that, like he is just a keyword guy. Like don't get me wrong, like Zimone, as much as okay, cool, it does normal Simicky things where you're drawing cards, putting lands into play, like that is powerful. It is still generic, and you can replace it with any other one. Like it does feel like you do hamper your characters a little bit by putting them in an uncommon role. And I feel that's going to be a common theme going forward in this episode, looking at a couple of characters.
For sure.
Sometimes you can only push it so far, and rarities, there for a reason, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Like legends used to always be this kind of mythical, kind of feeling-y kind of thing. It would always used to be like, if you have this big splashy legendary, like why isn't it a mythic? Isn't that what mythic status is meant for? Whether or not that translates in the design or not. I feel like rarity is a bit of a tricky one.
Yeah, very much so. Well, there we go. So yeah, next time we get a Ruther, just give me another Narset, but maybe a fixed Narset for Commander. That would be fun.
All good. Well, this is kind of similar to where I'm going, because I've got my my first choice as an uncommon as well, and it also plays into that kind of whether or not adding partner to certain cards kind of pushes their power level down as well. And this is a Glacian Power Stone Engineer, 5 and a blue for legendary creature, human artificer. 3/6, tap X untapped artifacts you control. Look at the top X cards of your library, put one of those cards into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. He's got partner. And the reason I picked him out is because in terms of like story gravitas, Like in terms of like looking at when they did original say Modern Horizons, and we got like an Urza card and a Yorgmoth card, and no one thought you could ever make an Urza card because it would be way too strong to have an old walker. They went, oh, don't worry, we're not going to make it a planeswalker. We're going to make him a legendary creature. I'm sure that'll make him much less broken and powerful. Yeah, it'll be fine. You know, and even like Yorgmoth is exceptionally strong. I mean, in comparing the two isn't necessarily particularly fair, but they do both do very, very strong things. And then you looked at Commander Legends. It was like, okay, amazing. We're going to see some characters we've never seen before. You know, we're going to get a new Jeska. We're going to get a new Kamal. And then we're like, okay, we're also going to give you some cards from, you know, back in the day. We're going to get a Radiant, who maybe it might be a better example of a card being too clunky and not feeling like it's designed to be played often, because she's also very, very, very expensive. But Glacian and Rebecca were kind of like a partnership. They were like, oh my gosh, we get to see that, you know, some of the Thran, you know, and the Thran, I feel like for me is definitely one of those parts of Magic Story that we don't get to see enough of, because it was from before the back in the day. You know, we've talked about this in our Tronland episodes of where like this is history from before the old history. You know, we never actually got to see too much of the Thran time in cards, right? And it just seemed that a 6-mana 3/6 that essentially taps and draws you a card, but it also requires you to tap down a load of your other artifacts. Like, I feel like flavor wise, it doesn't misrepresent Glacian, right? The idea being that he's a prestigious a technician when it comes to artifice, right? And Thran technology was like the pinnacle of artifice technology on Dominaria. Like, I don't think we've ever got back to that kind of method of industry or technological prowess. Like, it almost feels like Magic, even though if Magic in our modern world seems like it would be more interesting and more exciting than technology, to a magical world, technology is like, and science is actually probably more impressive than inherent. I can make fire come out of my hands. It's like, okay, well, I built a car. You know, I feel like that's I mean, blue is supposed to be like the color of like intelligence and academic prowess, right? And those are usually the artificers, which is kind of interesting, because I'd think growing a tree from nothing would be more impressive than lightning. But you know, I guess it's kind of flipped on its head in fantasy settings, right?
Yeah, sure.
And I just feel like it just, it's one of those cards. It doesn't make, as soon as I saw it, it didn't make me really, really want to put it somewhere. There wasn't a lot of places for me to find a place to play it, and it didn't feel like it did anything better or more interesting than any of the other artificers we've seen. Like Arkham Dagson, for example, is a good example of someone who sacks an artifact. You go and search library for an artifact, put it into play. That it just didn't feel like his ability or his power level, as it were, or his strength and as a artificer is being presented well here. The only reason I'd say that it kind of, I kind of don't mind is the fact that everything goes into your graveyard. Normally these kinds of abilities, it would be look at the top hex, put one into your hand, put the rest on the bottom in a random order, right? Whereas this one just chucks everything else into the bin, which kind of plays a little bit nice, kind of almost shows like this almost a recklessness to the side of him of, right, I can always pick those bits up for later, but I don't need them right now, instead of losing them. It's almost like all the knowledge of all the different bits he looked through is still in his mind. Maybe he needs to go back into the scrapyard to pick them back up again, and there's always an opportunity, because you know, as Magic players, we know the graveyard's a second hand. It doesn't count as you might as well have drawn all of those cards. It just, I don't know, it just felt like as a 3/6 mana, you have to wait a turn to do something, and all that something is to draw a card and fill up your graveyard a little bit. It just felt like it didn't quite hit what I wanted from Glacian. Whereas Rebecca, similarly, an uncommon partner. I think she's a 3/4 for 4 mana, so 3 and a white. And artifacts you control have protection from converted mana cost of artifacts you control. Now, that's a really cool, really interesting ability. Like, it's something that's it's almost as generic as Glacian's ability, but it's super powerful, and it kind of plays to her character more of being a protector, right? Of being someone who looked after the Thran Empire and kind of was its as I said, like it's protector. And I play with Silas Wren, because it's a really nice way to get your board through and get Silas through, and you know, the play pattern plays quite nicely. But Glacian just didn't seem to have anything that made me go, oh, that could be really useful in this situation. You know, it doesn't offer something different, it doesn't offer something new, and I don't think it's powerful enough for what I was expecting after years of wanting a Glacian card, and how long I'm likely to have to wait if we ever get another Glacian card. Like, how long did we have to wait between Ludovics? Like, significantly, right?
Yeah, I mean, the problem is with that, I suppose, is that like Ludovic was story relevant to a set that was coming out. Yeah, so I don't think we are going to get another Glacian.
Yeah, so it's like it's a one and done kind of thing, and I think the art, because it's Megane Villeneuve as well. Like the art in it's fantastic. This is one thing we haven't talked about either, is whether or not we feel like sometimes artwork presents our characters well enough, and you can look at a card and be like, "Oh, I've been waiting for this guy. Oh, he looks like shit. Never mind, don't want to play him." Whether like there is a
Well,
degree of that
there was a
sometimes.
little bit of that with Rem Corrales, wasn't there? Where I said when we were doing our set review and of Innistrad, the latest one that's come out, and Rem was there, and I was like, "Oh, this is absolutely not the character I thought Rem was going to be. Like far too glorious and righteous than I thought. Like a grizzled sort of what's the word?
A fiend hunter, the guy,
Van Helsing. That's it.
Van Helsing, yeah.
He's the Van Helsing, right? So the fact that
Yeah.
he's like not in a bedraggled leather coat and with scars and burn marks all over his face, and instead like riding a griff with a pointy hat. Like, I mean, but whatever. That's because that's on me, right, as a consumer, especially in a character that's in flavor text, and like that is also, I suppose the reason we've not spoken about the art thing is because that's completely subjective. There's no hard and fast on that, unless they literally just change the race of a whole character, and from like, oh, it's an orc character, yeah, we felt like making them a centaur, that would be a big deal, I suppose.
They won't notice, it'll be fine.
They won't know.
Yeah. Like there is a degree of, if a card looks really, really cool and you want to go and play it, or you see an artwork, you're like, yes, this is sick, I want this in my command zone. Then you read what the card does and you go, I guess I don't want him in the command zone, right? Like I feel like there is sometimes a bit of a letdown when a card looks really, really good and it's a character you really wanted to see, and it's even more of a blow when you're like, but it's super pretty, why can't I play it?
That's so funny. The next one I'm going to talk about is exactly that.
Really, and I feel like there are certain cards that you do just happen to get, like they just fall under the waist. And I think a lot of people would forget that Glacian even had a card, unless you're like super into the story. And if you are super into the story, then you're not going to not be disappointed. In my mind, that's how I feel anyway. When you're out there is clamoring to go and play Glacian. I know you're thinking of potentially building a deck with him, but the thing about being a partner is, one, okay, brings the power level down naturally anyway, because you could partner with anything.
Yeah.
It also means now I feel like you're likely to rely on the other partner to kind of carry the power of the deck, whereas Glacian as a character should be pretty fucking prestigious.
Yeah, I was very tempted to do like a Glacian and Rebecca like enchanted artifacts deck. Like, I really liked the idea of like having a bunch of artifact creatures and like enchanting them with auras. So the idea that you're imbuing your automatons with like runic magic. Like, just the story of that really played well in my head. And I was trying to think of like Hannah Ship's Navigator is like a really obvious choice because that's just like a really good utility commander in the right colors. Well, right enough anyway. Quite like red in there, but. Yeah, Glacian and Rebecca seem to be the thing. Yeah. I'm not doing that deck anymore. That's a deck in my head,
That's exactly the sound that legendary creatures shouldn't make you do, especially when you have, when you're being printed for the first time in 15 years. It shouldn't be like, yeah, all right, well, they tried. It's like, no, do better, Senator, do better.
All right, well, let's move on then to my next pick, and this one is exactly what you were saying about, I really wanted it to be cool, and it looks really awesome, but it doesn't do anything the thing that I want it to do, and that's Lavinia, Azorius Renegade. So Lavinia Azorius Renegade is white and a blue for a legendary creature, human soldier. Each opponent can't cast non-creature spells with converted mana cost greater than the number of lands that player controls. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast it, counter that spell for a 2/2. So essentially, it's trying to lock down artifact ramp. It's trying to lock down zero cost artifacts like, I don't know, Mana Crypt, Mana Vault. They're 0 mana, right?
Yep.
I don't play either of them.
There's also some things like Force of Will and Force of Negation, Fierce Guardianship, all of those cheeky blue spells, right, that try and sneak in.
Which is kind of a rare thing, actually, because this was printed in Ravnica Allegiance, and it's quite funny that this is a card that they printed into a standard set, and they obviously had to have the character, because Lavinia is an incredibly cool character, which I'll talk about in a minute, but they definitely didn't print this for standard. This is for almost every other format. This is for every other format, like, that play, or at least any of them where those cards are kind of are a big deal. So Lavinia is a character that's been in Ravnican lore for quite a long time. A member of the Azorius Senate. They were originally an arrester, and then they became a maze runner during the Dragon Maze events for the Azorius. And then during the War of the Spark, Ravnica Allegiance, Guilds of Ravnica era, they were ousted from the Azorius because Dovin Barn took over as one of Bolas's puppet Planeswalker guild leaders, and Lavinia saw that this was not a good deal, so they left. They were tracking down one of Bolas's agents, which turned out to be Tezzeret, and then in the story, they get forced into being one of Bolas's agents by basically being brainwashed. They get have a little device placed on their neck, and they become brainwashed until things resolve themselves. But so Lavinia's sort of story track goes from them being a very pious and self-righteous, like Azorius diehard, into literally an Azorius renegade, where they're still trying to keep the rules of law, but they're doing so surreptitiously. And it really played into this whole like sort of Ravnica noir thing that they were going for in Allegiance and Guilds, where it was all very like detective novel and sort of that kind of pulp fictiony like looking thing. And the two artworks for Lavinia Azorius Renegade, you got Stephen Belladin did the sort of main set art, and then the promo art for the store championships, which is they were still doing. By Matt Stewart, is like just drenched in this kind of noir feel. So both these cards look really, really cool, and I was happy to have either of them like in my command zone. If I'm building a deck, 2-mana commanders are right in my street as well. And the ability is just so oppressive. It doesn't really matter in a lot of metas, and B, it's just so oppressive in the ones that it does. And it just didn't read to me like someone who was A, on the back foot, and B, as something that really tracked with Lavinia's character. So if you look at Lavinia's previous card in Dragon's Maze, Lavinia of the 10th, when they're a maze runner, they have protection from red, which sort of tracks with the idea that the Rakdos and the Azorius are always at each other's throats. They're like a big sort of like rivalry within the guilds. And then it says, when Lavinia the 10th enters the battlefield, to detain each non-land permanent you control with converted mana cost 4 or less. So it locks things down. And in like Blink decks and Flicker decks, this also takes out a whole bunch of mana rocks, and it's quite an oppressive card, but at least it was selective. And I liked the idea that there was still this idea that Lavinia was under the rule of law, picking and choosing the targets which they felt needed attention. And Lavinia Azorius Renegade, whilst I suppose the flavour of the card is that they're trying to slow down the perceived arch enemies of any given table or game by slowing down the fast mana and the zero cost counter spells and all that kind of thing. And within the story, it's them trying to slow down the machinations of Tezzeret and Bolas and the Planeswalker Guildmasters and all that kind of stuff. It just doesn't read to me as the underdog. That reads to me as the oppressor and someone who is in charge and kind of putting things on lockdown. What I'd love more to see from a Lavinia card, or this Lavinia card anyway, would have been like maybe an activated ability that saw you being able to take out a permanent and lock it down. So it could be something similar to pay X, detain each permanent with mana cost X, or target permanent cost with mana value X or less. Do you know what I mean? So someone who's going around and sabotaging individual game pieces to break up the momentum of, say, a combo deck or a stacks deck or whatever else we're doing. And I kind of feel like that would read and evoke far more this working in the shadows, running around, like, knocking a bolt out of a machine, or like blowing up something to, like, make sure it doesn't work anymore. Very much an Azorius Renegade. I don't know, how did you feel about the new Lavinia card? Because I know Lavinia is a character that you really enjoy as well.
I feel like if you just swap the names, everything's fine.
Oh, really? So, like, if Lavinia of the 10th was the 2-drop and Azorius Renegade,
because like obviously you swap the sets over as well, right? Like, because the thing is, I feel like what Azorius Renegade does is way more defined law magic than Lavinia of the 10th. I feel like having protection from red because she's on the run, against like the Gruul, the Rakdos, blah 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 blah. Nicol Bolas is also red for what it's worth. Feels more in keeping for a renegade, and then also the fact that she just blanketly detains a bunch of things. I mean, I guess she doesn't have the power, but then it feels like it almost feels like the power that she has is strong. I mean, it's more conditional. Don't get me wrong. She doesn't just do a generic thing whenever she comes in, and you guarantee to get value out of her. It's a bit more specific. But yeah, I know what you mean. It's a plant, right? It feels like we want this kind of like hate. I imagine the conversation was cool. We're going to do another Lavinia card, or we're going to make our maze runner for the Azorius, like, okay, it's an Azorius card. We're going to make it cheap. We're going to put some kind of hate bear effects on it. Oh, also Lavinia's going to be, obviously Lavinia's their stand-in for that particular guild. So let's obviously put her name on top of it. And then again, I agree, it doesn't feel like what she was doing in the story and then what she's doing on the card necessarily translates.
Yeah, I just feel like you could put that text box on any white hate bear. Like, there are plenty of white hate bears that have a similar thing and make it like a mythic rare, just generic thing. I just think Lavinia as a character was being far more proactive than the card would suggest. And it's a character that I really liked. And for me personally, and this is all personal subjective, I would absolutely love to do a blue-white Lavinia deck with a 2-mana commander that does something slightly control-y, But this isn't slightly controlly. This is, I'm either going to lock down your entire board or I'm not going to do anything. Like I seem to remember Jimmy Wong on Game Nights played a Lavinia deck, and it didn't do anything with Lavinia. I think it was just there because of the colours and because that was the card set that they were doing that time around. I seem to remember watching it thinking like, oh, okay, he's going to do like a Lavinia deck that's not completely like oppressive, and then it didn't use Lavinia at all, really. So yeah, so I don't know. I mean, Lavinia at this point in time is kind of standing in as Jace's kind of go-to contact on Ravnica, and is very much like an archivist nowadays rather than like an arrester. So maybe in the future we could see a Lavinia that has maybe like a card draw effect on it, which would be quite nice, and maybe some control elements. But I hope they move away from this blanket control thing, because it's not a great look for Lavinia, and I kind of feel it's not what they do anymore. But yeah, there we go. That's Lavinia for me.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. To be fair, I was going to go to a similar card. It's almost the exact same discussion. This was going to be Leovold, because I feel like it has the similar thing, right? Of where if you're trying to push a certain theme or a certain like aspect of a card, and then you're not kind of noticing kind of how egregious it is, or how much it like kind of slates the game. Because the thing is, there's a massive amount of transferred feeling when it comes to how do I feel about a character from the story point of view, and then how do I feel about it when I'm playing against it. And it's almost like, oh, I absolutely hate this character, because it's almost like when you see actors playing a specific role, right? Like in Harry Potter, Professor Umbridge, the actress who plays her, if I see her in anything else, I'm just gonna be like, you're a bitch, you're awful, I hate you, because you played such an amazing role as a character you're supposed to not like. Then you just kind of transfer that kind of anger and hatred onto the actors, and no matter what role they do, like that they end up being it's almost like a self-perpetuating perpetuating prophecy, right? Of where like you do the job so well of being hated that everyone just starts to hate you. And I feel like Leovold was another good example of this, right? Of where it's become like it was a boogeyman, and it felt like it was generic punishment for trying to do things that yes, okay, might be considered obnoxious, like drawing more than one card a turn. But the difference between having it available in the command zone and then just having it available as a spell effect, like on, say, like Narset or something like that, is like a big difference. And sometimes putting your oppressive abilities onto a character only hurts the character. It doesn't make the character come across particularly well, even if it is a hateful character. It's like, I don't think like any of the Nicol Bolas cards are so horrible to play against. You're like, oh, fuck that guy. You're playing Nicol Bolas, which you should be, right? Nicol Bolas cards should make you go, oh, fuck you. Like whenever I used to cheat out his original card with Sign of the Ur-Dragon, it's like, oh, I attack you. Oh, okay, I don't block. Cool, I make it into a Nicol Bolas. Discard your hand. And you go, you fuck. You bastard. It's like, yeah, Nicol Bolas. welcome to Magic. With other cards, I feel like sometimes it hurts the character to have a card that's so oppressive. So yeah, no, I feel like, yeah, Paul Lavinia. But we're going to use, I think I'm going to use a different example for my second one, and that's, I'm going to look at Baron. And Baron's another example of like an old card or an old character that I feel like didn't necessarily have his dues basically. And that's because one of the best cards I think in Magic in terms of like flavor and like a succinct flavor text that makes me really happy is Obliterate, right?
Sure.
And Obliterate is it's been printed a few times. I'm talking about the original Invasion one. And it's 6 red for a sorcery. It can't be countered. Destroy all artifacts, creatures, and lands. They can't be regenerated. Ooh boy. And the flavor text: for his family, Baron made a funeral pyre of Teleria. And the video, and the I was going to say video. The image is literally him blowing up like an entire continent, like an entire goddamn continent. Like 8 mana spells back then weren't like that common, and they made spells that were 8 mana feel like you were putting a lot of mana into it. It's almost like Star of Extinction from Ixalan, right? It's a really expensive red spell. It's a meteor hitting the bloody planet. Like, of course it's going to be really expensive. Whereas I feel like his actual cards don't show that strength. They don't show that power. Like the other spells that he has are things like Baron's Unmaking, which is just bounce a creature, or bounce a permanent to its owner's hands. Baron's Spite does the same kind of thing of where one of them gets bounced, one of them gets sacrificed, and his codex doesn't really do anything at all, as like most Urza's things like Urza's Sunglasses don't have any effect to his cards or anything. And like it's 2 cards that he had. One is 1 blue for a 1/1. It's a legendary wizard. Pay 2 mana, sacrifice a permanent to return target creature to its owner's hand. Cool, blue control manipulation-y stuff, fair enough. And then the thing that kind of annoyed me is that they did a new card for him in M21. They
Mm-hmm.
did a new card for him in the Teferi set of where they had a chance to look back at a card. And I don't think like the original Baron Master Wizard is a bad card. Like it plays well. I just look at Baron Master Wizard as a card and what it's doing. I look at Obliterate and I'm like, well, where's the power disparity here in terms of like story implications of how strong you are? I'm like, okay, maybe they're doing better in this one. And it's not. It's already not a good sign that he's a rare. And it's 1 for a 2/2 legendary creature human wizard. When he enters the battlefield, return up to one other target creature or planeswalker to its owner's hand. And at the beginning of your end step, if a permanent is put into your hand from the battlefield this turn, draw a card.
Mm.
Now, arguably, that's worse. That's worse than the card that they made before. Because okay, yeah, you don't have to sacrifice a permanent to return something. It just happens naturally as ETBs. Oh, and you can also draw a card. It's not a repeatable effect. It's not as abusable. Like Baron Master Wizard, you could abuse, right? And I feel like mages and things from back in the day that were super strong, if you're not able to in some fashion abuse their abilities, it kind of doesn't show how abusive they were with their abilities within the story, right?
Sure.
And some of the things that they're achieving. I mean, yeah, you can't just make everybody old walker status power level, right? But I mean, this is Baron. He's a master wizard, you know. And then I don't know, it just felt like a blue wizard that bounces things is fine and dandy, but that could have just been any old blue wizard that bounces things. Anything and everything can bounce things. I know that he was like the poster child for the Legends back in the day, you know, during Urza's block of being the bounce mage, you know, and that's fine. I don't think that's a bad idea. That's a really good identity, like a power, a mechanical identity for Baron of the guy that bounces things, and it's any permanent. So you could bounce. Well, I guess his original card was in any permanent, but for example, Barons I'm making is that you can bounce like a land or something. That's like a pretty strong ability to do. Whereas I feel like, I don't know, like you had another opportunity. Again, Ryan Pancost does amazing work on the artwork. He looks really, really cool. And then he's just kind of like okay-ish. And he's the Tellerian Archmage. You know, he should be Urza level of power. And I know, again, you can't just translate every card to be perfectly powerful, but you could maybe try a bit harder. And I don't know, I just feel like it felt like, okay, yeah, they took his initial idea and his initial ability, transferred it into a new card that had a bit more utility. You could use him a bit more, you can use different other things to synergize with him, other ways to bounce things to your hand. Fair enough, cool, you get to draw some cards, not an issue. I just don't feel like the thing that made me love Baron as a character, the card Obliterate, is represented at all by either of his legendary creatures, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, yeah, especially the most recent one just seemed to be, I don't know how they got there, if I'm honest with you. I'm sure someone will be able to tell me, like, you know, with the gaining of knowledge maybe and protecting stuff. I don't know. Yeah, interesting. I agree. I think Baron's maybe a little bit underserved. But then I feel like Baron is somewhat underserved in the minds of modern Magic players because it's a character on the face of it that is so very close to Urza in terms of, like, you know, their role and their look and their whole feel, that if you didn't know the whole story of it, you'd maybe confuse Baron as Urza. Do you know what I mean? So I kind of feel like, yeah, that they didn't give Baron enough to make them super distinct and make people go, ooh, who's this guy? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a shame, especially when it's a character not a lot of people know about, and looking at Baron Tellerian Archmage doesn't make you go, oh, who the fuck's this guy? Let me go and look for him, you know. And that's kind of like one of the main pulls of making a character from back in the day, is it kind of reminds you of someone from the story before, and makes you go and look them up, and they'll go, okay, cool, well, blue legend that bounces things. Next.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Mm.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, my last one then is maybe one of my favourite ideas of a character, and I don't know why I'm so attracted to them. If only because I don't know why, because it doesn't seem to be a character that really does much for me in any other sphere of my engagement with the game. But I don't know why I really like the design of it. I just feel like the design of it could be pushed more, and that's Geist of Saint Traft. So Geist of Saint Traft is from original Innistrad block, and it's 1 white blue for a legendary creature, Spirit Cleric, 2/2, and it has hexproof. Whenever Geist of Saint Traft attacks, create a 4/4 white angel creature token with flying that's tapped and attacking. Exile that token at the end of combat, and it's a mythic rare, which is something to note down. So the Geist of Saint Traft. Saint Traft was a character from Innistrad who was a Cathar, who was so good at slaying monsters and doing Cathar shit that he got sainted really early on. So he was a young saint, a living saint, and even angels revered what what Saint Traft was doing on the plains. Even the angels were like, "Holy shit, this human kicks ass! Like, well done." Then to the point where a cult who worshipped the demon Withengar wanted to get Saint Traft out the way. So, long story short, they tricked Saint Traft into wielding a blade called Elbrus, the Binding Blade, which is also a card in Magic, and slaughtering a bunch of cultists under the influence of this blade, which completed a ritual that summoned Withengar, and then Withengar killed Saint Traft. Saint Traft comes back as a Geist, the Geist of Saint Traft, and it said a little story note is that there is an angel that is always present with the Geist of Saint Traft because the angels feel like they somewhat failed in protecting this saint. Like they did so much for killing demons on the plane that the angels feel like, oh, we let Saint Traft get killed so easily, so they kind of are now one with him. So the flavour of the Geist of Saint Traft as a Spirit Cleric, firstly, great. The Geist of Saint Traft as a name is a really cool name convention. And the attack where it brings an angel into play very much tracks with the sort of end of the Geist sort of story in that first block. So, okay, fine, Geist of Saint Traft. I'm kind of going to cheat here a little bit, because the next card I'm going to talk about isn't actually a legendary creature, which I'd want changed or maybe expanded on.
Gasp.
But the next... Sorry?
Gasp. Oh, no.
Yeah, but the next card in the sort of story of this is Invocation of Saint Traft. So Invocation of Saint Traft is 1 white blue for an enchantment aura, enchant creature. When enchanted creature has, whenever this creature attacks, put a 4/4 white angel creature token onto the battlefield with flying, tapped and attacking, exile the token at the end of combat. So it's an aura that literally gives the ability of the Geist of Saint Traft onto whatever creature you put it on. Now, they downshifted this to rare, which tells you something about the impact that this ability really has. And this also came in Shadows over Innistrad, which was the next Innistrad block. And Geist's story in that block is that he eventually helps Thalia and actually possesses her at one point to take down the Eldrazi threat and to take down Brazella, which was the big Eldrazi angel, and was acted as an invocation, literally, of Saint Traft. So again, on the face of it, that flavour is kind of okay. My big problem with all of this, because it just sounds like I'm saying how good these flavour beats are, is that not only is the original card now, looking back at it, because it was printed quite a long time ago nowadays, not actually, for a mythic rare, is actually quite poor in terms of its ability. It's a 2/2, and although it has hexproof, who's attacking in with a 3-mana 2/2 that also brings a 4/4 angel into play? Like, it's so... Like, in what format can you reasonably attack with that unless you load it up with, like, artifacts and other auras and things like that? It just, on its own, it sits so poorly. Like, I play it in my Bruhan deck that I recently rebuilt because it's another lieutenant. But even then, I often find myself not necessarily attacking in with it. Like, I think it's one of the weaker ones. My problem with the Invocation of Saint Traft is that it's so simplistic for what they could have done with that character. It's just an enchantment aura that makes something have the abilities of Saint Traft. Not only does Thalia in the story not have the exact abilities of the Geist of Saint Traft, he just has his kind of... She just has his kind of blessing and sort of like imbued with some like protection a little bit. She doesn't bring in angels to help her the same way that Saint Traft does. It doesn't give the creature hexproof like how the Geist of Saint Traft has hexproof. And in the artwork for the Invocation of Saint Traft by I always butcher this person's name, I'm so sorry, Igor Kryuluk, the person in the artwork is holding the sword of Saint Traft. So his blade that's in the previous artwork, and then Saint Traft is behind them, resting a ghostly hand on their shoulder. So it's a sword. So it's not an enchantment. It's the sword.
And what's worse, right, is that the Moonsilver Spear is in the same... was already in the set that already did the same thing of where it makes an angel. So are you telling it, is it the Moonsilver Spear that makes the angel? Is it the sword that... Is it Saint Traft that makes angel? Yeah.
Do you know what was also in the same block as well as the original Geist of Saint Traft? Elbrus, the Binding Blade, which was a legendary artifact equipment that then flipped into the demon once the sort of, the thing was done. So it had a equipped creature gets +1/+0 when it deals damage to a player, unattach Elbrus Binding Blade, and then transform it. And you transform it into Withengar, which was this mad mythic rare demon, 13/13, flying, intimidate, trample, put 13/1/1 counters on it when a player loses the game. Like, bonkers good. Why didn't they? So this is my pitch for... So the cards on their own, Geist of Saint Traft, Invocation of Saint Traft, you can argue they're fine. Why would you whinge about them? My thing is, why did they not turn Invocation in Shadows, or do a third card for Midnight Hunt or Crimson Vow, where you had the Sword of Saint Traft as legendary artifact equipment on one side, and then on the back side you could have had an Invocation of Saint Traft like effect. So don't do the creature, but do, you know, legendary enchantment aura. Target creature gets flying, first strike, hexproof, and make it this big bonkers thing, because you're literally being possessed by the geist of a warrior so legendary that angels weep about the loss of them. Do you know what I mean? I feel like even though the flavor was sort of there, the impact of it was so middling, and they had the tools to make a much better card all the way back in Dark Ascension with Binding Blade. For a set so obsessed with flip cards and double face cards and things that turn into other things, it was such a hugely missed opportunity, even back in Shadows, because they had things like the Heirloom Blade in Shadows. Why wasn't Heirloom Blade just the slot where they made some crazy mythic enchantment artifact? You know?
Yeah, I feel like it's funny because I remember playing Standard back when Geist was around, and he hit like a truck. Like the play pattern with him did work, but that was. Let me just check the date on it. Original Innistrad God's Turn was how many years? Oh, it was 10 years ago. That was 10 years ago,
It's a
Andy.
decade of card design.
So I feel like, yeah, the idea of like power creep can't be helped, especially on Legends, especially on cared for characters. I feel like power creep and story mechanical creep and that kind of thing. It all incorporates together, right? The cards tend to get bigger, bolder, splashier, blah 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 blah. And I think there was a big harkening for there to be a Thalia Geist flip card, right? For it's Thalia on the front side, and then maybe it flips on the back side.
Oh, that would be even better. Yeah.
Right?
That'd be fantastic. Put
That
that
was
in
an opportunity
Eldritch
they had.
Moon. Yeah.
And then even in the new set, we already lamented at the fact that we didn't get the Thalia's sword, but we also didn't get Odric's sword. We also didn't get St. Traft's sword. It's like there are all these opportunities for like legendary equipments from characters, and you don't get. I don't need a new Geist of St. Traft. I think the original Geist of St. Traft does what it does succinctly enough, and maybe you'd have to like skew his flavor, or you'd have to give him a new story to like inform what his new card would do. I understand all of that nonsense and everything.
Well, it was good for a first attempt at a character with the trends of card design at the time.
But
yeah,
now, you could have done something where you can inform his character more. Even giving us the Sword of Saint Traft is increasing the flavor of that character, right? It gives you something else. And also, within a Geist of Saint Traft deck, if you've got a Geist of Saint Traft deck, that deck really wants cool equipment because it's a hexproof commander. So why not give him something that then, plays within his own card design? We just simply didn't get a Geist card in either of the other Innistrad sets. Yeah, you got an enchantment that kind of is that his spell, his signature spell or whatever. But in the latest Innistrad double feature, as it were, like we didn't get a new Geist card. We didn't get a Thalia card that interacted with Geist. We got an original Thalia, which we've already sung the praise of its own flavour for its own reasons. But then we also have all of these magical weapons that can inform our legendary creatures that we don't see either. Like we've recently had people ask us, like, "Oh, what's the deal with Odric's sword? Is it a card?" And we're like,
No,
nothing else to say about it.
Despite this glowing iconic sword that's
so
in all of his artworks,
it's literally in Hero's Downfall, and and that's I guess another reason why Odric again might be a bit of a letdown. It's the same kind of thing of where we had a guy, we didn't get a new Geist, we didn't get his sword. The same way we got an Odric that people went to unbelievably enamored with, and we also didn't get his sword. And then where's Thalia's sword? Where are the swords? And I guess it's a similar thing. If Invocation seems like a lazy design when trying to be a homage to Geist, when all it is the exact same card, but you took off the creature stats and you enchant the creature with it instead.
Didn't even give the creature hexproof.
Yeah.
It's a rare. It's a 3-mana rare.
I know, it's ridiculous. And also the other thing about Geist is that it's a fucking spirit. He's not gone anywhere. Where is he? Show me Geist. He's not as if he's been fucking exorcised from the plane, has he? It's not as if you can argue, oh, well, he's dead now, so you can't really get a new card from him. He's a fucking ghost. I hope again when we go back again, it's one of these things of like, had we not got a Runo card, I'd have flipped the table, and yet it feels like there were certain characters like Geist of St. Traft that really could have done with a modern spin on it of like, oh, look how powerful he was back in the day. He was a boogeyman of of that standard format. Can't wait to see what they do with him. Oh, they didn't give him a card, never mind.
Yeah, I mean, we won't be going back to Innistrad anytime soon. I can only hope for supplemental sets if they do like a supplemental set where maybe like equipment is a theme. That they'll start doing all this.
Or
why
wasn't he the Commander Precon legend? Why do we need Millicent or Mildred or whatever, Maleficent or whatever her fucking name was? Why couldn't it have just been another St. Traft? Like,
Mm.
that would have been another spin on him, that now he's a leading spirits, because all of the angels have died off, now he's leading all the spirits, and you could have had him be the head of, even something as simple as that kind of
Mm.
could have been an opportunity. Yeah, whatever. Okay.
So there we go. I mean, so that's my thing. It's a really weird balance because both the flavor of both of his cards. I mean, obviously, Invocation isn't really his card, but as you said, it's his signature. They do the thing, but they did the thing in Magic 10 years ago, and I just sort of feel like. But even 10 years ago, again, Dark Ascension had Binding Blade, and I just feel like that would have been a much cleaner nod back to the Geist of Saint Traft. Would be to have a card that mirrored Elbrus and Withengar, because that is literally his story nemesis. So to have, you know, Sword of Saint Traft or Blade of Saint Traft into Invocation of Saint Traft would have been far cleaner. But there we go. So hopefully next time we see Saint Traft, it will be something more along those lines. But I doubt it. But you live in hope.
You live in hope, exactly. Cool. Well, my last one is um, something that I think is likely to be fixed this year, and that's Mishra Artificer Prodigy.
Oh yes.
And the reason I look at this card is it amalgamates all the things we've kind of talked about today in terms of like it's so I'll say what it does first. 1 blue, black, red for a legendary creature, human artificer. Have all of mine been artificers? No. No, one was a wizard. That's fine. Okay, good. Whenever you play an artifact spell, you may search your graveyard, hand, and/or library for a card with the same name as that spell and put it into play. If you search your library this way, shuffle it. A sojourn through time gave dark inspiration to one gifted young mind. So this was in Time Spiral block. I mean, this is I'm pretty sure this is just a look back at what Mishra was like from his day and age. I would have liked to have seen maybe a planar chaos version of him, of where he's like the good guy, like they did with Braids. But either way, the artwork also by Scott M. Fisher can't be understated. I really like Scott M. Fisher's artwork. I think Death of a Thousand Stings is one of the first artworks I really, really fell in love with from Magic. That's from like the OG Kamigawa block. I'm pretty sure it's the same artist. And the thing that I don't mind about, so the thing about Mishra is he is obviously Urza's younger brother. They both had their own prestigious artifice ability. I do like the idea that Mishra is almost like duplicating, right? Of where whenever he makes something, he ends up making two of them. The issue I have with this is that as a character who is so prolific, you literally cannot play him in the set or in the format designed for Legends being Commander, because his ability directly doesn't work within the format of having single copies. It's almost like I always did this for Dragon Lord Colligan. Because it has the same. It's really the only reason I didn't is because it makes sense that it's a flying haste that gives all of your other creatures haste, like super hasty, And I liked the idea that whenever you cast a spell that's already in your graveyard, it's almost like, yeah, you've already done that before. Like, come on, do something new, And you take 10 damage every time you cast a spell that you've already got in your graveyard. Doesn't work in the commander format. Fair enough. That's not the only thing that kind of annoys me about it. It's more the fact that it's a very specific. It can work in the commander format, but it's such a gimmick, right? You have to play with Possibility Storm, and the idea is that whenever you cast a spell, you put it on the bottom, and you get a free artifact off the top, and then you go all the way down to the original spell and you get that as well. I think it works fine enough, right? Of where it's a cool gimmick, but you only ever do that one thing. If you never draw the Possibility Storm and you're in Grixis colours, so it's kind of hard to fetch it. Like, your deck just does stone cold nothing. It's not like Phage the Untouchable or Dakon Strongguard or whatever it is, the night guy that you can only play from your graveyard, where your gimmicks are strong. There's enough cards in the format that can kind of help you play into it. With something like Phage, you've got things like Command Tower and stuff like that, right? Of where you can get it into your hand to play it. I just feel like, for such a cool card that's supposed to be the equivalent to Urza and Urza's foil, as it were, and he's done such ridiculous things. He made like dragon engines and things like that. To have a card that you literally cannot play, regardless of whether or not I think his ability is cool. And even nowadays, like, there are so many, as I say, I've said this about Arkham Dagson and before, and with Glacian, like, there's a lot of artificers out there doing a lot of artifacty things. Whereas, and as much as this is individual and unique, it doesn't feel strong or powerful enough compared to, say, like, the latest Urza iteration, which we're not going to compare every card to Urza, because that's silly. But going into this year, knowing that we're going to get a Brothers War set, this is a prime example of what Wizards are doing recently as well. Almost like they retcon old Legends, if they go, yeah, well, cool, we're now a 30-year-old game. There's plenty of characters that we want to show and give players the chance to play with, but they're not going to play with the old card because it's just, some cards are just stone cold unplayable, and other cards there are just better versions we've made of them. And this isn't the way that we would represent the character now if we had, with all the knowledge and the mechanics we've got within the game. This isn't how we want to see them. So I'm pretty sure we're going to get a new Mishra card. I really hope that it doesn't get overshadowed by yet another Urza card that's also really, really good. Because I feel like it's just one of those opportunities of where you don't really get to play with him, and it would be great to play with him because it's a cool ability. It just cannot function effectively, and that's just a shame that certain cards just don't function effectively. And again, this is one of those, we can't just say, oh, every legendary creature has to be viable in Commander, but there is almost an expectation of nowadays, if you make a legendary creature, you kind of got to make it work in Commander a little bit, because otherwise the main pull to playing that legendary creature, because in Standard, Modern, whatever nonsense, you do have the issue of you can't play multiple copies of it. So why would you play more than multiple copies? And usually the legends are a bit more expensive, a bit more clunky. You tend not to play it in your streamlined, aggro decks or even like your mid-range decks or whatever. So it's like, this is the format the card is meant for, and it can't be played in it. So I feel like, yeah, we need to do better. Like, it would be nice to have a new Mishra, and it'd be nice to see him be a bit more evil, like being the Artificer Prodigy. We're seeing him at a point in time before he kind of became cray and got his all like Phyrexian skeleton bullshit nonsense. And I'd like to see the Phyrexian version of Mishra when he's at like his height of power, kind of being all kind of like, I am the anti-Urza. And that would be quite cool. That's what I want to see. I just feel like it's a letdown. And again, because it's a cool card with a cool artwork, with a cool ability, and yet it's stone cold unplayable.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we will absolutely get a new Mishra card, so it'll be interesting to see what they do with it there. Yeah, cool. I mean, it's nice to start the year off with a bit of a whinge. Get the bile all nice and riled up. I think that's probably the best way forwards.
Well, we ended with. We ended with a bit of both, and I feel like we start as we mean to go on with a bit of like, this is constructive whinging. It's academic critique.
We're not talking about the stuff that we hated. We're talking about the stuff we would love to see. There we go. That's how we're going to spin this one.
Exactly. It's not that it was bad, it's that it could be better.
All right. Well, listeners, please let us know which cards you felt maybe got shortchanged in their latest card, or where you would like to see a current character with a card go next. Because obviously, some of the stuff we've spoken about today, the Flavour worked on the card that was there, but it's the next iteration that you'd love to see something different on. You can let us know via Twitter at mtflavouring. Emails go to mtflavouring@gmail.com. My personal Twitter is at AndyManface. Nathan's, yours is
at the Fox in the Moon.
And Nathan, you are doing something interesting this year.
I am. Yeah, we're in a bit of a countdown. The plan has been for a long time to go and do a bit of travelling. And COVID, as much as it was awful, and put a big stop on that, allowed me to save a little bit of money. And it's no longer something that's going to be happening in the future. It's now something that's going to be happening like very, very soon. So I'm going to go traveling to Mexico, maybe go to a few other places. We're taking some time away from England. Initially, my idea was maybe I pack a Commander deck, maybe I take a webcam with me. And now I'm like, no, don't do that. So I'm going to be, unfortunately, our podcast together are marked on almost on one hand at this point in terms of weeks. So it's super, super exciting, but it does mean there's a change afoot on the horizon. And I think it works out that the last weekend I'm in the country is the pre-release for Neon Dynasty, which is amazing because the first set I have played with was Kamigawa, and it's almost like the last set before I take a significant break away from Magic is going to be Kamigawa. So it's almost like a nice bookend. So I'm also looking forward to doing a lot of the episodes leading into that set, because I think that's going to be a lot of fun, especially because you didn't really play Kamigawa at all, and we haven't been back there in ages. We got told we were never going back there, so it's going to be a really interesting thing to see both of our sides from how that set's going to be received and the lead into it. But yeah, there is a degree of sadness departure.
For sure. Well, no, it's very exciting because, like people know, like we know each other for a long time. You've always wanted to go off traveling, so it's kind of cool that you're getting to do it now. But yeah, there will be some changes to the podcast. You won't be gone like forever, hopefully anyway. No. So it'll be just like a momentary sort of change in the format. I think we're gonna call it season 2. The first episode that you're not here. So it could be shorter episodes where it's me just babbling on about certain things, especially for more of the world building ones. We might see if we can get some guests on. But yeah, there will be some slight changes afoot. But we'll talk about that more once we get up to it. Well, all that remains for me to say then is, thank you so much for listening. This has been Magic the Flavouring.
We'll see you soon.